much. Good morning, my colleagues. Welcome to the plenary session of the conference. I'm Hao Wu from WCO. As we are all together living on this planet, and we need to govern this global in a peaceful and orderly manner. However, when we look at the world today, we will see there are a lot of problems and challenges in front of us. Therefore, the concept of global governance has arisen. Global governance is about providing public goods to the world. Global governance is also about setting up international norms, and global governance is about the role of the international organization could play. And I think the world customs community plays a very important and unique part in terms of global governance. And today, we're happy to invite Professor Dr. Wouters from KU Leuven, based in Belgium, to give us his wonderful speech on global governance in trade and customs, the unique case of WCO. Professor Wouters is Jean Monnet Chair of EU and Global Governance in KU Leuven, and he is also associated with a lot of top universities in the United States, in European countries, and has published extensively articles and books with leading publishers. So I'd like to give the floor to Professor Wouters. Let's welcome Professor Wouters for his wonderful speech. The floor is yours, Jean.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor and privilege for me to be invited here to give a keynote on global governance in trade and customs and talk about the unique case of the World Customs Organization. As any lawyer would do, I will start with a disclaimer. I'm not a specialist in the World Customs Organization. I feel like Alice in Wonderland now that I'm discovering the World Customs Organization. I have been teaching for many decades international organizations at my university and at various other universities, and I can assure you the World Customs Organization is a very unique organization. It's fascinating. And I would like to dwell a little bit with you about this and put these things in the perspective of global governance indeed. So this is the plan. A couple of introductory remarks, some reflections on the notion of global governance. Then the question, how does the WCO fit that picture? And some concluding remarks. Our chair has already indicated that we are living in interesting times. I would even add turbulent times. Multilateralism, the whole fabric of international cooperation that was painstakingly created after the Second World War, is facing great challenges. The world is changing very quickly, and also the world of international organizations is facing rapid transformations, and the WCO is a part of that. There are many things that you can see happening in the world of international organizations. While we are convening here, we have the sessions of the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York, and you may have noticed some very interesting speeches there in the high-level segment at the beginning of the opening of the General Assembly, which were also referring besides to global governance. But what is really interesting about the world of international organizations is that there is always a process going on of, I would say, incremental, spontaneous reform and modernization. Sometimes in very creative manners, sometimes in ways that legal people like me cannot immediately capture Because we look at organizations, we look at the institutional processes, we look at the clauses in a treaty that say, under these conditions you can modify and amend a treaty. But what we sometimes are not looking sufficiently at are the actual real-life dynamics of an international organization. And there again, the WCO is so incredibly interesting. But international organizations nowadays are also becoming more and more part of a global governance network. So the networking, the outreach of international organizations is incredibly important. And I'm going to also look at that from the viewpoint of the WCO. Why do we take a global governance perspective? Because we believe it offers an interesting analytical tool to study these processes. I'm going to explain that a little bit further by giving you also a definition of global governance. Now watch out, global governance has been defined in 1,000 ways. So no single definition is really the only authoritative definition. But this is a definition developed by a colleague and good friend, Professor Tom Weiss of the City University of New York. And it is a very bold definition, but it gives you a flavor of what is special about global governance as opposed to the more traditional notions of international law and international relations. Because what does it all entail? Professor Weiss says it's the sum of laws, norms, policies, institutions that define, constitute, and mediate transborder relations, not just between states, but also between cultures, citizens, intergovernmental organizations like the WCO, and non-governmental organizations, and even the market. So when we look at global governance, it is a very inclusive perspective. We look at the totality of institutions at the global level, at the regional, sub-regional, local level. We look at policies, not just formal rules. We also look at public institutions, but also private norms and institutions and actors. So it's states, but it's also non-state actors that we are studying as part of global governance. What they have in common is that all these actors, the multiplicity of actors that we're looking at, are interacting with each other, and very often at multiple levels. I'm coming from Belgium, the heart of the European Union. My university is very close to Brussels, the headquarters not just of the World Customs Organization, but also of the European Union and NATO. Well, if you walk around in Brussels, you really feel like in a multi-layered environment, because you will have governments and governance at various levels. The regional level of the country, the federal level of Belgium, the European Union level, the level of international organizations. You have more than 118 organizations with a presence in Brussels alone. So it's a quite amazing thing, but it shows you also multi-level interactions. The World Customs Organization is a global organization, but you know that since 2007, the European Union has become part of the World Customs Organization. And we constantly see interactions bottom-up and top-down between the states, the regional organizations, the global organizations. There is also an interplay in global governance between the public and the private. There's a lot of private regulation, dynamism, that we cannot capture if we just look at the public international law side of things. And there's a lot of formal and informal norms going on. Enough theory, let me try to capture the essence of this definition and then try to apply it to the case of the World Customs Organizations. States remain, of course, the central actors in today's international system. That is obvious. Without states, we wouldn't be able to rule the world, to organize the world. But states are not the only actors anymore. They have increasingly been joined by international intergovernmental organizations of a great variety. Today's world has more than 700 international organizations, more than 3 times the number of states. Organizations at the global level, at the regional level, at the sub-regional level. And they're increasingly interacting with each other. But there is also this incredible dynamic of what I would call international civil society. Non-state actors, transnational NGOs, the private sector, business sector, all have their role to play and all have a certain responsibility to assume. And what is very important is that international organizations of today interact with all these actors. And that is what the World Customs Organization is doing. So let us start applying that to the case of the WCO. But first, a little bit of history. Because if you go back to the history of the World Customs Organization, it very much reads like global governance avant la lettre. Let me go back to the 1940s, because the origins are there, 1947, 1948, when indeed a study group examined the question of a possible customs union between European countries. We are years before the European communities come about. We are just after the Second World War. We have just seen that there are all kinds of international economic institutions being built, the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and World Bank, the ITO, the International Trade Organization, provided for by the Havana Charter, but which never would see the light of day, and which was in a certain way substituted by the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The GATT by itself is an incredibly creative story, because what some people do not know is that the GATT was just an agreement, and it was applied for nearly 50 years on a provisional basis between governments, not even formally ratified. And it, in a way, evolved towards a de facto organization that, in the very end, with the Marrakesh Agreement, gave way to the World Trade Organization in 1995. Well, here you see already in the 1940s the dynamics that a study group is examining the questions of customs cooperation inspired by the GATT. By the GATT, who, as you all know, in Article 24, has special facilities, very original arrangements to enable the making of customs unions or free trade zones. So you have that process. That leads quite quickly to the creation of 2 committees. One committee, the Economic Committee, which in a very interesting way would later on evolve towards the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, established in 1960. And on the other hand, a Customs Committee, which was the predecessor of what would become the CCC, the Customs Cooperation Council, which indeed is based on a convention that entered into force in November 1952, January 1953, to be precise, the 26th of January 1953, you have the very first meeting of 17 countries in the first council session of the Customs Cooperation Council. And as you know, that date, 26th of January, is now known as International Customs Day. So you see the institutional dynamic unfolding, but it's based upon a convention. It's not based upon, let's say, a formal international organization in those days. You see that institutional dynamic unfolding incrementally, and you see the rise of membership towards what we have today, 182 customs administrations being a member of the World Customs Organization, covering collectively around 98% of world trade. And in 1994, The Council adopts an informal name, the World Customs Organization, to reflect the global nature of the organization. But watch it, an informal name. One never changed the convention. This is a very spontaneous form of metamorphosis decided by the organization itself. So you see here one illustration of this constant transformation that is going on. And it's not a coincidence that we speak about 1994, because these, as you know, were the days that the Marrakesh Agreement was in the end concluded and would culminate in the World Trade Organization. So I can imagine indeed that the WCO also wanted to be called an organization. Fits nicely with the other organization in Geneva. So how does the WCO fit this picture of global governance? I think because it is a very special intergovernmental organization today. As I said, it counts 182 members, but it is open to non-state members. And I gave already the example of the European Union joining in 2007 the WCO. From a legal point of view, let me note that the EU's participation is based upon the provisional application of that membership, because there is still the idea that in the very end one needs to make changes to the underlying convention. And then you have to wait until the 182 members all change that. So, but provisionally the EU is there and participates fully. We have headquarters of this wonderful organization in Brussels, but I should stress from the outset that Brussels is just that, and that the organization is extremely well networked all over the world. You have a regional approach in the sense that you have 6 regions with regional offices for capacity building. You have 11 regional intelligence liaison offices throughout the 6 regions. You have 26 regional training centers, and you see them here displayed on this map. So it really shows you that the WCO itself is already very much networked and adopting this more flexible approach in order to be near to its, if I may call it that way, customers, to its end users, to the agents, to the officials that it has to work with on a daily basis. There's not just that. The WCO is also very closely linked to other organizations. It is working together very closely, for instance, and obviously, with the World Trade Organization. WTO has also an observer status at the WCO, just like the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and World Bank, just like the OECD. But it's also important to stress that the WCO is very active itself in the WTO, and in particular in the Customs Valuation Committee and in the Committee on the Rules of Origin. There again you see fascinating interactions between the two organizations. And then there is something else. The WCO is more than an organization. It has a lot, and it has generated a lot of rules, a lot of instruments, in particular binding treaty instruments, conventions. There is the Kyoto Convention, the original convention dating from the 1970s, but revised in 1999, entered into force with the revised version in 2006. That's on simplification and harmonization of customs procedures. You also have the Nairobi Convention, prevention, repression, and investigation of customs offenses. You have the very ambitious Johannesburg Convention, which of course is on mutual assistance with regard to customs matters, but maybe because of its ambitious nature is still in need of a number of additional ratifications. What is so interesting about this network of treaties, of conventions, is that the WCO is so different from, for instance, the WTO. In the World Trade Organization, There is also an incredible network of agreements, but most of the agreements are called multilateral agreements and are mandatory, compulsory for all the members of the WTO. That is very, very different in the World Customs Organization. So again, lots of diversity. I should also stress from this global governance perspective that the WCO engages with other actors than governments. There's the private sector where the WCO engages with very important companies through its private sector consultants group, the PSCG, which indeed has meetings with the WCO and where indeed you have a possibility for interaction and dialogue between the needs and the concerns of the private sector and the WCO. But there are a lot of other ways of interacting of the WCO with a great variety of other organizations through all forms of instruments, in particular MOUs. Just one example, 2007 Lisbon, an MOU was signed with the EMCDDA, the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drugs Addiction of the European Union, where indeed that agency really was looking forward to working together closely with the WCO on matters of cross-border crime, money laundering, and drugs trafficking. I'm already coming to the end of my story, and I just wanted to, as a form of conclusion, make a couple of reflections on how unique the WCO is in this landscape of international organizations and global governance. You see, it's a very special and creative case. Legally speaking, there are lots of issues that a professor of international law could start discussing about, yeah, have you done this, have you done that? But the WCO shows us that where there is a will to work together, it is actually taking place. And the WCO also shows us that it is a very dynamic and quickly evolving organization in a broader context of global governance. And in a certain way, I would say that the WCO, in that sense, is a very modern and 21st century organization. Much more adaptable, much more flexible than many of the more traditional intergovernmental organizations. I think it's a wonderful case to study more carefully and to get to know better. So I hope with this we could give you a foretaste, and I would be very happy to engage with you with any questions that you have. Thank you very much. Let's stay here. No? Okay, I'll go there.
Thank you very much, Jan. It seems that you know more about WCO than I do. Okay, so my colleagues, if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand. We can just give the floor to you. Any questions?
I'm also happy to answer questions in private.
So actually, we are a little bit behind the agenda, so we can just move to the next keynote speech. So we'd like to thank you, Jean, again for your wonderful speech, and you shared with us a lot of knowledge about global governance. I think it's a very important concept, especially for WCO as an international organization. And I think we can just go on working together on this kind of research on this subject. So thank you again for your coming here. Thank you again for your time with us. Thank you. Okay, my colleagues, let's move on to the next keynote speech today. As we know, PICARD is a gathering of researchers, and one of the most important things for researchers is to write and publish our research products and papers, articles, and among the variety of journals we can see that have a relation with customs. There's a special journal, and it's a very salient journal. The name of the journal is Global Trade and Customs Journal. And today we're happy to invite editor-in-chief of the journal, Mr. Jeffery Snyder. And Jeffery Snyder is a good researcher and a good editor, and has long and rich experience in terms of reviewing papers and articles on customs and trade issues. So today, we'd like to invite Mr. Jeffery Snyder to share with us his ideas on the trends in global customs. So the floor is yours, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Hao. I appreciate it. You may have seen my name, but many of you may not know me, and you may ask, how did he get here? What is he doing in this business? I was born in Los Angeles, California, but at an early age, my father became a U.S. Foreign Service officer. He worked for USAID. We moved to the Philippines. I lived in Manila, and then after a time in Washington, to Ethiopia, where I graduated from high school. My father then served in El Salvador, in Niamey, Niger, and then Maseru, Lesotho. I learned firsthand how important trade is to economic development, and I saw firsthand that customs is the heart of trade. That sparked my love of trade and my career. My work now, relating to the liberalization of international trade, the study of trade and customs facilitation, is born of my past, and so that is what brought me here. As an editor of the Global Trade and Customs Journal, I live mostly in a world of practitioners. Practitioners care very much about what the WCO is doing, but they often have more urgent priorities: clearing cargo, managing supply chains, in effect, keeping their jobs. I feel that I'm at the intersection of these two. They're not really different worlds, just different perspectives on the same global economy. I enjoy publishing the views of WCO authors. The journal now has a WCO corner for regular contributions. I look for contributions that will advance trade and will continue to demonstrate that wonderful, inexorable force. Trade, it can't be stopped. It can be interrupted or deferred, but it, like time and tide, is unstoppable. Three things, time, tide, and trade, as a wise mentor once told me, are unstoppable. This one, okay. I will turn to some trends in customs matters in a moment, but first let me offer my humble appreciation to the Turkish Ministry of Trade, the Korea Customs, and of course to the WCO, Secretary General Mikaria, who's been on the editorial board from the beginning of the journal's creation, and my friends in the research unit, of course. I also want to thank many of you here in the audience in attendance at PICARD 2018. You have published in the journal and you've supported its mission. Thank you to all of you as well. I see many contributors in the audience. Thank you. I cherish the relationship between the WCO and the Global Trade and Customs Journal, and I see the missions are very much aligned. The journal is a vehicle for memorializing, recording, and sharing developments in customs law and practice around the world. It is an honor to collaborate. Thank you again. I'd like to turn a little bit to provide some ideas on trends in global customs in two ways. One, I'd like to provide some information about the articles that the journal has published this year that focus on customs, and also spend a little time on other trends beyond the journal that we're looking at for 2019, and also other things that are arising that I hope someday to have articles on. By way of background, the journal blends a variety of views for practitioners, views of many, including the WCO community. When I took over the journal 10 years ago, I pledged to fulfill the global part of the title. The journal began as one that was focused very much on the WTO and on European law. I have sought to increase the focus on customs and to make it cover more geographically with contributions from around the world, including Africa, Asia, increasingly China, and Latin America. To illustrate this, I'd like to review some of the customs articles published in 2018, beginning in February. The journal in that issue included an article on customs valuation under the UCC, and a very nice article on Korean customs classification regime. In March, we had a WCO contribution. Thomas is here. Political arithmetic of borders toward an enlightened form of criticism. In April, from China, we had a new digital infrastructure, cross-border e-commerce, and the global vision of creating an electronic world trading platform. Again in April, a WCO author, Maria, I think, is here as well, harnessing the power of data for customs enforcement, a subject very important, obviously, for the WCO, but also very important for global companies. In May, we had an article on the Hamamatsu case. Many of you may be familiar with this case. It's a ACJ case involving transaction value and when traders may and may not rely on transaction value for transactions in the European Union. In addition, with respect to Africa in May, we had an article combating customs fraud in East and South Africa region. In June, a number of good articles as well, customs value and warranties, how warranties are treated within the context of customs value. Good faith and customs preferential origin claims, Heredia. This is a very interesting article about the good faith reliance on information in presenting an origin claim. And if it turns out that the information is mistaken, how will that case be treated? How will that importer be treated? We also had the unreliability of merchandise trade statistics. Tadashi Yasui, I think, also is a WCO alum, and a book review on a new analysis of the EU Customs Code. In July, the entire issue was taken up, a double issue, with a look at the harmonization or not of customs penalties in Europe. We had views of the European Commission, Spain, Lithuania, Portugal, France, Germany, Belgium, Poland, and I think our Polish author is actually here in the room somewhere. Wes is here, and thanks to him. We also had Italy and the UK. In October, the current issue, assessing the determinants of customs-related transaction costs in, of all places, Turkey. A very nice coincidence. And November, December, the final issue of this year, will be what we're calling a next generation, a special issue filled with the views of leaders of the future. So we're calling it the under 40 generation, much younger than I am, of course, and their take on what they see as the most important issues coming up in the future. And you may ask about 2019. It's already in the works. The first issue for January is already at the publisher. And for the course of the year, we have a variety of topics in the works already. Intellectual property and customs, how that will affect customs value. Origin determinations, which continues to be an important issue. Origin marking, especially in Europe. The marking requirements for imported goods. Valuation, I'll talk more about valuation, but this continues to be one of the most important issues for importers. Trade facilitation, of course, that's not going away. E-commerce as well. We'll have a special issue on e-commerce. One Belt, One Road is scheduled for the July-August double issue. And of course, from the WCO, we'll have an article in the first issue from our own Hao Wu. But in addition, going beyond what's in the journal, some of you may know I'm also a lawyer. During the day, I work on international trade matters, customs and trade matters. And so I've been involved in a number of projects that I try to blend into the journal as well as in my practice. And one of the things that I've been spending more time on in the past few years is transfer pricing valuation issues arising from the OECD's BEPS initiative, base erosion and profit shifting. Of course, this is primarily a tax effort by the OECD, but as it's adopted by more and more countries, what's happening is that the customs impact of the tax changes required by BEPS have created a challenge for many companies to restructure their supply chain, to restructure intellectual property, and restructure the assets that are deployed in managing both tax and customs. The second issue, being from Washington, as you can imagine, keeps me very busy, is disruption. I don't think this is my original term. I like to think I coined it about 2 years ago, but I think many have used it. The disruption of trade that has been occasioned by the Trump administration is in many, many different ways. Section 301, we've all heard about. Section 232 on steel and aluminum. The new NAFTA, I'm not even familiar enough with the acronym yet, and it doesn't roll off the tongue the same way NAFTA does. TPP and the possibility of new trade agreements, and a surge in new anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases. From the customs perspective, most of what we've been doing, in addition to obviously to defending these cases, is to look at classification and valuation. Many importers will reach a determination of valuation and classification that they are comfortable with, but when a duty like 25% comes along, there is suddenly an interest in trying to be sure that in fact the classification is correct and that the valuation is correct. And it's at that time when importers begin to look for creative solutions and look at alternative methods of valuation, look for changes in the supply chain that may affect classification. Those kinds of issues are very much important today to companies trading. Next is Brexit. There were developments even as recently as this week. But this is an area we had a special issue in 2017 on Brexit, and we will have more articles this year. How this is going to affect trade is obviously a concern that many have. Brexit, as well as the election of President Trump, created a need within the publishing community, and Kluwer decided to organize a blog. This blog, Regulating for Globalization, is really about deglobalization. It's a blog which is designed to gather views and gather ideas and comments about the tension between these withdrawal efforts or the deglobalization efforts, and obviously as I believe, the continuing inexorable growth of international trade. The blog is available for anyone to submit comments. It's not a legal blog at all. A journal is not a legal journal. And so if you look at the blog and it's of interest and you want to make a comment, please let me know. E-commerce is not going away. There were some fascinating presentations just this morning about e-commerce, and I expect that to continue. I see several articles that have come in looking for publication in 2019. Blockchain. There was a program, a panel yesterday on blockchain, and I was not able to be there because I was moderating a different panel, and I would love to have been in the room to hear about blockchain. This is something which we're hearing more and more about in our work, and companies are coming to us and asking whether they should deploy a blockchain. They're being asked to join a blockchain. These are important questions for information sharing and for liability. U.S. Customs has a pilot project for origin certificates where they're testing the use of blockchain in making entry related to preferential claims. What kind of information is being provided, who owns that information, how that information is being used, all present challenges. The benefits of blockchain are obvious. But there are many concerns and many risks about using blockchain that I expect will be ongoing and that we will continue to study. I look forward to writing on blockchain and supply chain in the future. Another major trend, the U.S. retreat and general discord. This is a challenge to maintaining the momentum of liberalization and trade facilitation that's taken place over the past 50 years. We've heard a lot about where things are right now. Frank Altemuller on Tuesday had a very nice presentation about the breakdown in the world order and where we are. And I know that he has some optimism. I have optimism as well, taking a long view, of course. But this trend is going to be dominating much of the work over the next few years. Some of the U.S. customs focus areas, there are many, but these are two that I think we are seeing more and more focus on. One is forced labor in the supply chain. This is something that the U.S. has become very focused on, especially most recently in the case of North Korea, because of special sanctions legislation in the U.S. that increase the penalties for trading with companies who are doing business with North Korean labor. This combination between customs import embargoes and sanctions targeted at a foreign government is a fairly new development and is creating challenges for importers in many industries, including seafood, apparel. Many Asian supply chains are being affected by the presence, not Asian, but European as well, the presence of North Korean labor in those supply chains. Customs trade measures enforcement. I mentioned earlier the number of trade actions that Trump has implemented. I've heard estimates that the implementation of these measures is doubled the work for customs, going beyond its routine work and spending time being sure that the proper products have the right duty applied to them, they're being affected by or being targeted properly, has increased the amount of work, which raises questions about the routine work that customs must do every day. In closing, I'll say a few things. I'm sure, and I expect to be surprised in 2019 with more issues. I was surprised in 2018, almost every day. Every time a new tweet came out, there was something new that we had to begin to think about. What I've shared with you are really just a few of the things that I see coming. I also want to express my appreciation for Secretary General Mikuria's comments on Tuesday regarding globalization. The backlash against globalization that he described has seen tremendous force in the United States. We are seeing unprecedented attacks on the global trading system. Trade may be disrupted, but customs trade facilitation is more important than ever. So I encourage all of you to stay vigilant and agile and keep thinking and writing. As I depart tomorrow for Washington, I will carry with me the hope inspired by this PICARD conference. Despite the current disruption of trade, there is a dedicated community, all of you, of thinkers and believers, as I do, that it matters. And I'd like to share this quote I found about the origins and the purpose of the PICARD conference, which I think is very relevant today. The demands of globalization and modernization require a greater understanding of the political, economic, and trading environment in which customs is expected to operate. And that environment is changing every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I think your speech will be very enlightening for us to think about where to go in terms of research, and I think we can just catch up with the trends as you have mentioned today. So, my colleagues, if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand. Yeah, I know we're a little bit tired after the 2 days conference here, and also I think we have a very tight schedule. So to save the time, because we can just keep talking during the quick break or during these days, and according to the agenda here, I can see we are going to move to the round table. So without coffee break or tea break, so we will just switch. Thank you very much.